The man in the dark hoodie wasn't supposed to be there. He stood in the shadows of aisle 7, one hand gripping an empty shopping cart, the other touching the faded wedding ring he couldn't take off. Then he heard it, a woman's voice, quiet and almost apologetic, drifting from the bakery counter. "Do you have an expired cake for my daughter?" The clerk's face hardened. The little girl gripped her mother's hand tighter, and the man in the hoodie, Harrison Vale, heard everything. He didn't know that listening would cost him everything, or that it would save them both. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting their cold glow across the linoleum floors of the supermarket. It was 9:15 on a Tuesday night, and the store was nearly empty, except for a handful of shoppers drifting through the aisles like ghosts. Harrison stood motionless near the cereal boxes, his cart as empty as the last 2 years of his life had been. He hadn't come here to shop.
He'd come because the silence in his house had grown too loud because the walls of his bedroom still held the shape of conversations he'd never have again. Grief had taught him that sometimes motion was enough. Walking through fluorescent-lit aisles, pretending he needed milk, anything to avoid the echo of his daughter's laughter in rooms where she'd never laugh again. The woman at the bakery counter had her back to him, but Harrison could see the rigid line of her shoulders, the way her hand kept touching the strap of her worn purse. Her daughter, maybe 7 years old, stood beside her, small fingers wrapped around her mother's hand. The child wore sneakers with the laces tied wrong, one loop longer than the other. "I'm sorry," the bakery clerk said, not sounding sorry at all. "We can't sell expired product. Liability." The woman's voice dropped lower. Harrison moved closer without meaning to, drawn by something he couldn't name. "I understand."
"But tomorrow is her 7th birthday. I can pay for one that's set to expire tonight. Just something." The clerk crossed his arms. "Company policy. We donate or dispose them." Harrison's hand tightened on the cart handle. He watched the little girl look up at her mother, watched her small face arrange itself into something that looked too much like understanding, too much like resignation. He knew that look. He'd seen it in the mirror for 2 years. "Mommy," the girl whispered, "we don't need cake. I can blow candles on a cupcake from home." The woman's shoulders trembled once, just once, before she straightened. "You're right, sweetheart." Her voice was steady, now wrapped in the kind of dignity that came from having nothing left to lose except pride. "Let's go." Harrison stood frozen as they turned away from the counter. The woman's face was drawn with the particular exhaustion of someone working multiple jobs and still coming up short. But her chin was high, her grip on her daughter's hand was firm. She wasn't broken. She was just tired. The little girl glanced back at the bakery display case once, twice, then turned her attention forward. No tears. No pleading. Just a small hand in her mother's, and feet that kept moving. Something in Harrison's chest cracked open. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. He'd been standing in hospital hallways once, watching doctors shake their heads, feeling the world reduce itself to the things money couldn't buy. Time, miracles. One more day. He pushed his cart toward the bakery counter before he could think better of it. The clerk looked up. "Help you?" "The cakes." Harrison's voice came out rougher than he'd intended. "The one's set to expire tonight. How many do you have?" The clerk blinked. "Maybe a dozen." "Sir, if you're asking because of that lady, how much for all of them, all of them?" The clerk's forehead creased. That'd be over $300. Harrison pulled out his wallet. The worn leather felt foreign in his hands. He hadn't used cash in months, hadn't needed to. His life had shrunk to delivery orders and automatic payments to meals he didn't taste and nights he didn't sleep. "I'll take 3. 3 cakes. 3 cakes. Harrison set $400 bills on the counter. "The woman who was just here. The one with the little girl. Give them to her." The clerk stared at the money. Sir, I don't. Tell her they're being discarded anyway. Tell her whatever makes it easy for her to accept. Harrison's fingers brushed the bills forward. Keep the change, for your trouble. The clerk's hand hovered over the money. Why? Harrison didn't answer. He turned away back toward the shadows of aisle 7, his cart still empty. Why? As if loss needed explanation. As if kindness required justification. He'd learned in the last 2 years that some questions had no good answers. You just acted, or you didn't. You reached out, or you stayed frozen. Behind him, he heard the clerk calling out. Heard the woman's voice again, surprised this time. I'm sorry, what? Someone paid for these. 3 cakes. Said to give them to you. Harrison moved quickly toward the far end of the store, past the produce section, where the mist machines hissed over the lettuce, past the meat counter with its sanitized smell. He didn't want thanks, didn't want to see her face when she realized someone had watched her moment of need and decided to intervene. But he heard her anyway. I can't accept charity. Her voice carried across the empty aisles, and Harrison stopped walking. Charity? The word landed like a punch. That's what it looked like from the outside, he supposed. A stranger throwing money at a problem. Comfortable distance. Easy absolution. He turned around. The woman was still at the bakery counter, standing straighter, now her arms crossed. The little girl pressed against her side. I work 3 jobs, the woman said to the clerk, her voice tight. We're fine. I don't need handouts. Ma'am, the gentleman already paid. Then give me his address. I'll pay him back. Harrison found himself walking toward them before he could reconsider. His hood was still up. His face mostly shadowed, but the woman's eyes locked onto him as he approached. Sharp eyes. Exhausted, but alert. The eyes of someone used to protecting what mattered. It's not charity, Harrison said quietly. The woman's jaw set. Then what is it? It's a father understanding what birthdays mean. The words came out before he could filter them, raw and unplanned. That's all. Her expression flickered. Something in her face softened, then hardened again like she was fighting not to accept comfort. I don't know you. No, Harrison agreed. You don't. The little girl tugged her mother's sleeve. Mommy, he's nice. Penny, the woman's voice held a warning, but her eyes never left Harrison's face. We don't take things from strangers. Then don't think of it as taking. Harrison nodded toward the cakes wrapped in plastic on the counter. Think of it as someone understanding that a 7-year-old deserves to blow out candles. That's all this is. The woman studied him for a long moment. Harrison had the sudden, uncomfortable feeling that she was seeing more than he wanted her to see. The shadows under his eyes, the hollowness in his voice, the ring he couldn't take off. Your eyes, she said slowly. Have we met before? Harrison's breath caught. I don't think so. But even as he said it, something stirred in his memory. Not a face, a feeling. The smell of hospital antiseptic and the sound of machines beeping in rhythm with his daughter's fading heartbeat. The nurses who'd stayed when he couldn't, who'd held Isabel's hand when his own had been shaking too hard to hold anything. The woman's brow furrowed. She opened her mouth to say something else, but the little girl, Penny, stepped forward. Suddenly, her small face tilted up toward Harrison with the kind of frank curiosity only children possessed. Thank you, mister, she said. Mommy says angels don't show their faces. The woman, Ruby, he heard the clerk call her Ruby, pulled her daughter back gently. Penny, that's enough. But Harrison crouched down, slowly bringing himself to the child's eye level. She had brown eyes that reminded him too much of Isabel's, curious and bright, untouched by the kind of cynicism adults learned after too many losses. Happy early birthday, he said. Penny smiled. One of her front teeth was missing. I'm gonna be 8. 7, Ruby corrected quietly. You're going to be 7. Oh. Right. Penny's smile didn't falter. I always forget. Harrison stood his knees protesting. He was only 38, but some days he felt decades older. The cakes are yours, he said to Ruby. No strings, no repayment. Just let your daughter have a birthday. Ruby's fingers tightened on Penny's shoulder. For a moment, Harrison thought she'd refuse anyway. Thought she'd push the cakes back across the counter and walk out with her head high and her hands empty. But then Penny looked up at her mother with those bright, hopeful eyes, and something in Ruby's resolve cracked. Thank you, she said, finally the words scraping out like they cost her something. But I will pay you back. Somehow. Harrison shook his head. Already forgotten? He turned to leave before she could argue, before the conversation could stretch into something uncomfortable. But as he reached the end of the aisle, he heard Ruby's voice one more time, soft enough that he almost missed it. Wait. He stopped but didn't turn around. I was a pediatric nurse, Ruby said. 3 years ago, at St. Catherine's Hospital. I worked the oncology wing. Harrison's entire body went cold. There was a little girl, Ruby continued, her voice trembling now. Room 304. She loved stories, loved the song, Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Her father used to sit outside her room for hours because he couldn't watch her suffer. And the last night someone had to stay with her, hold her hand, because her father had collapsed in the hallway. Harrison couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The supermarket lights overhead seemed too bright, suddenly the air too thin. You, Ruby whispered. You're him, aren't you? He turned slowly. Ruby's face had gone pale, her hand pressed to her mouth. Penny looked between them, confused, sensing something significant happening, but not understanding what. Isabel, Ruby said, and the name broke something in Harrison that hadn't been broken in months. Her name was Isabel. Harrison's vision blurred. He'd spent 2 years trying to outrun that night. The machines going silent, the nurse young, dark-haired with steady hands, and a voice like a lullaby holding his daughter's hand, because he'd been too shattered to hold anything. He'd never learned her name, had never been able to thank her, had collapsed into grief so complete that the hospital had become a blur of white coats and sympathy cards and memories he couldn't bear to touch. You stayed with her, he managed, when I couldn't. Ruby's eyes filled. She wasn't alone. I made sure she wasn't alone. The fluorescent lights hummed. The store's radio played something soft and meaningless in the background. Penny pressed closer to her mother, her small hand finding Ruby's. And Harrison stood in the middle of a supermarket at 9:30 on a Tuesday night, face to face with the woman who'd given his daughter the one thing he'd failed to give her in her final moments. Presence. I never knew your name, he said. Ruby Castellano. Harrison Vale. Recognition flashed across Ruby's face, followed immediately by something else, something harder. Vale, she repeated, as in Vale Industries. Harrison's stomach dropped. Yes, Ruby took a step back. Your company fired me 6 months ago, cost reduction. They said I was redundant? The words hit like bullets. Harrison stared at her, at this woman who'd held his daughter's hand in her last moments, who'd been cut loose by the company he'd built, while he'd been too lost in grief to notice, too absent to care. He'd stepped away after Isabel's death, handed control to his executives, let them make decisions, while he wandered through empty rooms and emptier days. And they'd fired her. I didn't know. Harrison said, the words sounding pathetic even to his own ears. After Isabel, I stepped away. Let others run things. Others, Ruby echoed bitterly. Others who decided that pediatric nurses with 8 years of experience were expendable, She picked up the cakes from the counter, her movements sharp, now angry. "Keep your charity, Mr. Vale. I don't want it." "Ruby." "We're fine." She took Penny's hand. "We've always been fine." But as she turned to leave, something fell from her purse. A small calendar, the kind people bought at dollar stores, spiral-bound and worn at the edges. It landed at Harrison's feet, open to December. One date was circled in red marker. December 15th. Tomorrow. Harrison bent to pick it up, his hands shaking. December 15th. He stared at the circled date at the red ink bleeding slightly through the cheap paper. December 15th. Isabel's birthday. The day his daughter would have turned 9. The day she'd asked for strawberry cake instead of vanilla. The day she'd wanted to go to the zoo, even though she'd been too weak to walk more than a few steps. December 15th. Penny's birthday. "Ruby," he called out, but she was already gone, pushing through the automatic doors with her daughter in tow, and her dignity wrapped around her like armor. The doors slid shut behind them with a soft hiss. Harrison stood alone in the fluorescent-lit silence, holding a stranger's calendar with his daughter's birthday circled in red. The universe, he thought distantly, had a sick sense of humor. The clerk cleared his throat. "Sir, the cakes." Harrison set the calendar on the counter gently like it might break. "Box them up. I'll take them." "But the lady said—" "I know what she said." Harrison pulled out his wallet again. "Box them anyway." He walked out of the supermarket 10 minutes later with 3 birthday cakes in a cart and a calendar that didn't belong to him. The December air was sharp cold enough to sting. He could see Ruby's car across the parking lot, an old sedan with a dented bumper and a taillight held together with duct tape. She was buckling Penny into the back seat, her movements quick and efficient. Harrison loaded the cakes into his own car, a black sedan he'd barely driven in 6 months, and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Probably his assistant, probably something about the quarterly reports he was supposed to review. The company he'd built from nothing, and then abandoned because nothing seemed to matter after Isabel stopped breathing. He looked at Ruby's calendar again. December 15th. Same birthday. Same day. He thought about coincidences and wondered if they existed, or if the universe just had patterns humans were too small to see. Ruby's car pulled out of the parking lot. Harrison watched her taillights disappear into the December darkness. Then he started his engine and drove home to a house that was too big and too quiet and too full of ghosts. But before he went to sleep that night, he made a phone call. "Mr. Vale." His assistant's voice was surprised. "It's almost midnight." "I need the personnel files," Harrison said. "From Vale Health Network. Every termination from the last 12 months. "Sir, that could be hundreds of files. Then it'll take time." Harrison's voice was steady now, certain. "Start with the nurses. Pediatric unit. I want to know who made the decisions and why." "Is everything all right?" "No," Harrison said. "But it will be." He hung up before his assistant could ask more questions. Then he sat in the darkness of his study, Isabel's photo on the desk beside him, and waited for sunrise. The files arrived the next morning in a series of encrypted emails. Harrison sat at his desk, the desk he hadn't sat at in 18 months, and read through them with the kind of focus he hadn't felt since before the accident. The accident that had taken his wife and daughter in one terrible moment of twisted metal and broken glass. The accident that had left him and his son Oliver alive but shattered in different ways. Ruby Castellano's file was 30 pages long, 8 years of exemplary service, patient reviews that called her compassionate, skilled present. 3 commendations for going above and beyond. And then 6 months ago, a single line in red text, terminated. Cost Reduction Initiative, authorized by Derek Finch, Director of Human Resources. Harrison pulled up Derek's file next. 52 years old, 10 years with the company, and in the last year, a pattern that made Harrison's jaw tighten. Experienced staff terminated. Entry-level replacements hired at 40% lower salaries. Bonuses tied to cost reduction targets. He kept digging. By noon, he'd found the email. It was buried in an archived thread marked Confidential, sent from Derek Finch to the accounting department. Subject Q. 3. Cost reduction to accounting department from Derek Finch, HR director. Terminate high seniority nurses in pediatric unit. Replace with entry-level hires. Target 22% cost reduction. Prioritize employees with no family connections to board members or executives. Harrison read it twice. 3 times. The words didn't change. Terminate high seniority nurses. Ruby Castellano, who'd held his daughter's hand when he couldn't, who was now working 3 jobs to buy her daughter an expired cake. Terminated. For cost reduction. Harrison stood slowly from his desk. His hands were steady now, his mind clearer than it had been in 2 years. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in months. Mr. Vale. His COO sounded shocked. Is that really you? Schedule a board meeting, Harrison said. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., non-negotiable. Sir, tomorrow is, I know what tomorrow is. December 15th, his daughter's birthday. The day he'd let pass in silence for 2 years, unable to face the weight of it. 8 a.m., everyone attends, especially Derek Finch. He hung up and stared out his office window at the city below. Somewhere out there, Ruby was probably working one of her 3 jobs. Penny was probably at school, maybe excited about her birthday tomorrow, maybe pretending not to mind, that celebrations would be small and quiet and made of whatever her mother could scrape together. Harrison had spent 2 years running from presents, from showing up, from being there when it mattered. Tomorrow he decided that would change. The Vale Industries headquarters occupied 40 floors of glass and steel in downtown Boston. Harrison arrived at 7:30 in the morning, wearing a suit he hadn't worn since Isabel's funeral. The security guard at the front desk didn't recognize him at first. Sir, do you have an appointment? Harrison pulled back his hood, met the guard's eyes. I own the building, Marcus. Recognition dawned slowly. Mr. Vale. My God. We thought. I know what people thought. Harrison moved past him toward the elevators. I'm back. The ride up to the 40th floor felt longer than it should have. Harrison watched the numbers climb, watched his reflection in the polished steel doors. He looked older than 38. Grief had carved lines into his face that hadn't been there before. But his eyes were clear now. Focused. The executive floor was already buzzing with activity when he stepped out. People stopped mid-conversation, coffee cups frozen halfway to mouths. A woman Harrison vaguely recognized as someone from marketing actually gasped. Good morning, Harrison said mildly, and kept walking toward the boardroom. His assistant Jennifer, he remembered, with some guilt, scrambled after him. Mr. Vale, your office has been maintained, but we'll need to update your computer access. And, later, Harrison pushed open the boardroom doors. Right now, I have a meeting. The board members were already seated, 12 faces turning toward him, with expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed resentment. Derek Finch sat near the middle, his face carefully neutral. Harrison took his seat at the head of the table. The chair felt foreign and familiar all at once. Gentlemen, ladies. He set his phone on the table screen up. Thank you for coming on short notice. Harrison? Patricia Chen, his CFO, leaned forward. We're glad to see you, but perhaps easing back into... I'm not easing into anything. Harrison pulled up the email on his phone, projected it onto the screen behind him. I'm here because someone needs to answer for this. The email filled the screen. Silence fell over the room like a weight. Derek Finch's face went pale. 22% cost reduction, Harrison read aloud. achieved by terminating experienced nurses and replacing them with cheaper labor. Nurses who'd spent years mastering pediatric care. Nurses who held children's hands during their worst moments. Gone. Because someone decided numbers mattered more than people. Mr. Vale. Derek stood slowly. This was approved by the Efficiency Committee. We were facing budget shortfalls because someone was embezzling funds through shell vendors. Harrison pulled up another document. I spent last night with our forensic accountants, found some interesting patterns, payments to vendors that don't exist, kickbacks traced to a private account. Derek's mouth opened, closed. Your account. Harrison finished quietly. The room erupted, voices overlapping, accusations flying. Patricia Chen was already on her phone, presumably calling legal. Derek Finch sat down heavily, his face ashen. Harrison let the chaos wash over him for a moment. Then he raised one hand. Silence. Derek Finch is terminated effective immediately. Security will escort him out. Our legal team will handle the rest. Harrison's voice was calm, almost gentle. As for the rest of you, the ones who signed off on these cuts without asking questions, consider this your warning. We're a healthcare company. We save lives. We don't balance budgets by destroying them. He stood. I'm reinstating every nurse who was terminated in the last 12 months. Full back pay, formal apologies, and reviews of their positions. Some of them may not want to come back. That's their choice. But they'll have the choice. Harrison, Patricia said carefully. That's going to cost. I don't care what it costs. Harrison met her eyes. Money comes back. People don't. He walked out of the boardroom without waiting for responses. Jennifer followed him, tablet in hand, already making notes. I need you to find someone, Harrison said. Ruby Castellano, former pediatric nurse. Get me her phone number. Yes, sir. Jennifer's fingers flew across her tablet. Anything else? Harrison paused at his office door. Through the glass walls, he could see the city spread out below. Somewhere down there, Ruby was probably at work. Penny was probably at school, maybe counting down the hours until her birthday ended. Yes, he said quietly. Clear my afternoon. Ruby's phone rang 3 times before she answered. Harrison could hear noise in the background, the clatter of dishes, voices calling out orders. Restaurant work, he guessed. One of her 3 jobs. Hello. Ruby Castellano. Harrison kept his voice steady. This is Harrison Vale. Silence. Then, how did you get this number? I own a company. It wasn't hard. He paused. I need to talk to you. In person. I'm at work. I know. I'll wait. Harrison looked at the address Jennifer had written down. A diner 20 minutes away. I'll be outside when your shift ends, Mr. Vale. Harrison, he corrected, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance to make something right. More silence. Harrison could almost hear her thinking, weighing options, deciding whether he was worth her time. My shift ends at 3, she said finally. Don't be late. She hung up before he could respond. Harrison arrived at the diner at 2:45. It was the kind of place that had been around for decades, chrome and vinyl and grease-stained menus. Through the window, he could see Ruby moving between tables, balancing plates with practiced efficiency. Her face was tired, but determined, her movements quick and precise. At 3:05, she came outside, still wearing her uniform, a coat thrown over her shoulders. You're early, she said. I didn't want you to think I'd forgotten. Harrison gestured toward the park across the street. Walk with me. Ruby hesitated, then nodded. They walked in silence for a few minutes, past benches where old men fed pigeons and young mothers pushed strollers. The December air was cold, but not bitter. The sky was that particular shade of gray that promised snow. I fired Derek Finch this morning, Harrison said finally. The man who terminated you. He was embezzling, using cost reductions to hide the theft. Ruby stopped walking. What? You were fired so someone could steal? Harrison met her eyes. Along with dozens of others. Good people. Skilled people. People who mattered. Ruby's jaw worked. And you're telling me this because I want you to come back. Harrison pulled an envelope from his coat pocket. Not to your old position, to a new one. Director of Pediatric Patient Care. You'd oversee nursing standards, patient experience, family support programs. You'd have the authority to hire to fire, to rebuild the department the right way. He held out the envelope. Ruby stared at it like it might bite her. I don't want charity, she said. It's not charity. It's what you earned 2 years ago. Harrison's voice softened. You stayed with Isabel when I couldn't. You held her hand. You sang to her. You gave her something I failed to give her in her last moment's presence. And then my company thanked you by throwing you away when you became inconvenient. That wasn't your fault. It was my company. My responsibility. Harrison pressed the envelope into her hands. This is me taking responsibility. But it's also me recognizing that you're exactly what our pediatric unit needs. Not because of what you did for Isabel. Because you're good at what you do. Ruby opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a formal offer letter, complete with salary benefits start date. Her hands trembled as she read. This is 3 times what I was making before. It's what the position pays. Harrison slid his hands into his pockets. Market rate. You can verify that. Harrison. Ruby looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I can't accept this just because of... You're not accepting it because of Isabel. You're accepting it because Penny deserves a mother who comes home at a reasonable hour. Because patients deserve a nurse who isn't exhausted from working 3 jobs. Because you're good at this, Ruby. And good people shouldn't have to choose between dignity and survival. A tear slipped down Ruby's cheek. She wiped it away quickly, angrily. This feels like too much. It's not enough. Harrison glanced at his watch. It's 3:20. Penny gets out of school soon. Ruby nodded. Then go. Harrison turned to leave. Be there when she comes home. It's her birthday. Wait, Ruby caught his arm. Thank you. For this. For everything. Harrison looked at her hand on his sleeve, at the worn fingers and calloused palm. The hand that had held his daughters in her final moments. Thank you, he said quietly, for staying with her. I never got to tell you that. He walked away before she could respond, before the moment could become more than it needed to be. Behind him, he heard Ruby's soft sobs muffled quickly. But he didn't turn around. Some moments needed to be private. 3 weeks later, on a cold morning in early January, Harrison sat in his office reviewing patient satisfaction scores when Jennifer knocked on his door. Sir, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important. Who? Ruby Castellano and her daughter. Harrison's pen stopped moving. Send them in. Ruby entered first. Penny holding her hand. Both wore winter coats, snowflakes melting in their hair. Penny carried something wrapped in paper clutched to her chest like treasure. I'm sorry to drop in unannounced, Ruby said. I know you're busy. Never too busy. Harrison gestured toward the chairs across from his desk. Please. Sit. Penny sat carefully, her feet not quite touching the floor. She set the wrapped object on Harrison's desk with solemn ceremony. This is for you, she announced. For your daughter. Harrison's throat tightened. Penny, you didn't have to. Open it, Penny insisted. Harrison unwrapped the paper slowly. Inside was a child's drawing carefully colored within the lines, showing 2 girls holding hands under a rainbow. One girl wore a nurse's hat. The other wore angel wings. At the bottom, in careful 7-year-old handwriting, Isabel and Mommy. They're friends now. Harrison couldn't speak. She wanted you to know, Ruby said softly, that Isabel's not alone, that someone's taking care of her. Harrison set the drawing down carefully, his vision blurring. Thank you, he managed. Both of you. Penny smiled her gap-toothed smile. Mommy says you're sad sometimes, but it's okay to be sad. It means you loved her a lot. Out of the mouths of children, Harrison thought. He nodded, not trusting his voice. Mr. Vale. Penny continued, her small face serious now. Do you have a little boy? Harrison blinked. Yes. His name is Oliver. He's 11. Where is he? With his grandparents, in Vermont. Harrison's chest ached. We haven't talked much, since the accident. Penny tilted her head, considering. Then she stood, walked around the desk and hugged him. Just wrapped her small arms around his waist and held on. You should go see him, she said into his shirt. Before he forgets you're his dad. Harrison's carefully maintained composure cracked. He put one hand on Penny's back, feeling her small heartbeat through her winter coat. You're right, he whispered. I should. Ruby stood, her own eyes red. Penny let Mr. Vale breathe, but Harrison shook his head. It's okay. He crouched down to Penny's level. Thank you for reminding me. Sometimes adults forget the important things. That's what Mommy says too. Penny grinned. That's why kids have to help them remember. They left a few minutes later, Ruby apologizing again for the intrusion, Penny waving goodbye with both hands. Harrison sat alone in his office, Isabel's drawing on his desk next to her photo. 2 girls holding hands under a rainbow. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he'd been avoiding for 2 years. Hello. His son's voice was wary, uncertain. Oliver, Harrison said. It's Dad. I was thinking, maybe I could drive up this weekend? If you're free. We could, I don't know, go skiing. Or just talk. Whatever you want. Silence stretched across the line. Then quietly, okay, yeah, that'd be good. Saturday morning. Saturday morning. Harrison hung up and looked out his window at the city below. Somewhere out there, Ruby was probably on her way back to her apartment with Penny, both of them warm and fed, and no longer counting pennies for birthday cakes. Somewhere out there, families were living and loving and losing and finding ways to keep going anyway. And somewhere in Vermont, his son was waiting for him to remember how to be a father again. It was a start. 6 months later, on a warm afternoon in June, Harrison stood in a park watching Penny chase Oliver through the grass. His son had agreed to visit for the summer, hesitant at first, warming slowly to the idea of reconnecting. Ruby sat beside Harrison on a bench, both of them holding coffee cups from the cart near the playground. He's good with her, Ruby observed. Patient. He has practice. Isabel drove him crazy sometimes. Harrison smiled, the memory sharp, but no longer bleeding. He was a good big brother. He still is. Ruby gestured toward where Oliver was teaching Penny how to throw a frisbee. Just to a different little sister now. Harrison glanced at her. Is that what this is? Ruby met his eyes, her expression soft. I don't know what this is, but whatever it is, it's good. They watched the kids play in comfortable silence. Harrison's phone buzzed. Work calls always work. Calls. But he ignored it. Some things could wait. Some moments demanded presence. You know what today is? Ruby asked. June 22nd. Harrison frowned. Why? It's the day Isabel was admitted to St. Catherine's 3 years ago. Ruby's voice was gentle. I checked the records this morning. Didn't know if you'd remember. Harrison hadn't. The dates had all blurred together, markers of decline and desperate hope and final endings. But Ruby had remembered, had checked, had known that some anniversaries needed acknowledgement. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For being here. For staying. For remembering." Ruby's hand found his on the bench between them. "Always," she said, and Harrison, who'd spent 2 years running from presence, from being fully. In any moment that demanded feeling, Harrison squeezed her hand back and stayed exactly where he was. Present. Aware. Alive in the simple, complicated now of children laughing. And summer sun, and second chances he hadn't known he needed. Isabel's drawing hung in his office, now framed and protected. 2 girls holding hands under a rainbow, and below it, in Harrison's own handwriting, a line he'd added. "Some strangers aren't strangers at all. They're answers to prayers we forgot we whispered." Penny had been right. Adults forgot important things. But children remembered. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, they reminded you in time. Harrison looked at Ruby, at Oliver, at Penny, at the ordinary magic of an ordinary afternoon. And for the first time in 2 years, he felt something that almost resembled peace. It was enough. It was everything